After a DNA test, Millionaire discovers his supposed daughter belongs to an Uber driver. Gabriel Walsh was a man who seemed to have it all. At 42, he was the CEO of one of Boston's fastest-growing tech firms, with his name etched onto Forbes lists and his face recognized in high-profile circles. His penthouse overlooked the glimmering Charles River, a view most would envy, but behind the polished facade of success, Gabriel lived in a world of profound isolation. His marriage had crumbled years ago under the weight of his workaholic tendencies, and his closest companions were the silence of his home office and the hum of his luxury cars. But Gabriel wasn't always like this. There was a time when his life had been simpler, filled with youthful dreams and reckless romance. One of those fleeting moments had been with Mia Martinez, a free-spirited artist he'd met during a summer internship in New York 2 decades earlier. Their relationship burned bright but fast, extinguished by distance and diverging paths. Gabriel hadn't thought of Mia in years, until she showed up at his office one rainy afternoon, holding the hand of a teenage girl. "Gabriel," Mia began, her voice steady but her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "This is Elena. She's your daughter." The words hit him like a freight train. Gabriel's first instinct was disbelief. But when his gaze fell on Elena, the resemblance was undeniable, or so he thought. She had his dark brown eyes, his sharp cheekbones, even his determined stance. Mia explained that she had avoided reaching out all these years because she didn't want to disrupt his life. But now, as Elena neared adulthood, Mia felt it was time for Gabriel to know the truth, and for Elena to meet her father. Gabriel was stunned, but something deep inside him longed for this connection. He had always envisioned himself as a father, imagining the kind of wisdom and love he'd pass down. He welcomed Elena into his life with open arms, and for the first time in years, his cold, routine existence began to thaw. Over the next few months, Elena became the center of Gabriel's world. She was bright, talented, and full of dreams. Gabriel saw her potential and spared no expense in nurturing it, enrolling her in the best private school and introducing her to influential mentors. Their bond grew quickly, filled with shared dinners, weekend trips, and long conversations about life. For Gabriel, Elena wasn't just a daughter. She was a second chance at the family he'd always wanted but never had. Yet, as much as Gabriel adored Elena, small doubts began to creep into his mind. It started with little things. A comment from his sister about how Elena didn't quite share the Walsh family's distinctive smile, or a conversation with Mia that revealed gaps in the timeline of their relationship. Gabriel brushed these thoughts aside at first, dismissing them as paranoia. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. One evening, Gabriel found himself alone in his study, flipping through an old photo album Mia had left for Elena. The more he looked at the pictures, the more questions he had. There were inconsistencies, subtle, but enough to plant seeds of suspicion. Was Elena truly his daughter? Or had he allowed his longing for connection to cloud his judgment? Unable to shake the doubts, Gabriel made a decision that both terrified and relieved him. He arranged for a DNA test, telling himself it was just a formality. After all, the bond he'd formed with Elena was real, wasn't it? Still, the possibility of discovering the truth filled him with an ache he couldn't explain. As he waited for the test results, Gabriel couldn't help but reflect on his life and the choices that had led him to this moment. What would he do if the results didn't confirm what he desperately wanted to believe? What would it mean for Elena, who had only just begun to embrace him as her father? The questions haunted him, but one thing was clear. The truth, no matter how painful, had to come out. Little did Gabriel know, the truth he was about to uncover would shake his world to its core and lead him to confront not just his past, but a man he'd never met. A simple Uber driver whose life was about to change forever. The envelope sat on Gabriel's desk like a loaded gun. Small, plain, and unassuming, It contained the answer to a question that had been gnawing at him for weeks. Was Elena truly his daughter? For the past month, Gabriel had tried to focus on work, to distract himself with the endless stream of meetings and business deals. But every time he looked at Elena, a pang of guilt would strike his chest. What if he had let her into his life only to discover she wasn't his? What if the truth shattered the fragile bond they'd built? When Gabriel finally tore open the envelope, his hands trembled. His eyes scanned the results, skipping over the scientific jargon and zeroing in on the one line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 0%. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. Gabriel gripped the edge of his desk, his breath caught in his throat. The truth was undeniable. Elena was not his biological daughter. The room felt colder, the air heavier. Gabriel reread the results, hoping he'd made a mistake, but the words didn't change. Anger, confusion, and sadness churned inside him, a storm he couldn't control. He had poured his heart into being a father to Elena. He had let himself believe in a future where she was part of his life forever. And now, all of that felt like a cruel illusion. Gabriel's first thought was of Mia. Had she lied to him? Had she known all along that Elena wasn't his, and still chosen to drag him into this mess? He picked up his phone, ready to confront her, but stopped short. He needed to calm down. This wasn't just about him. It was about Elena, too. She didn't ask for any of this. She was a child caught in the crossfire of adult mistakes. Instead of calling Mia, Gabriel spent the night pacing his penthouse. Memories of the past months flashed through his mind. Elena laughing at one of his jokes, her excitement when he surprised her with a trip to the aquarium, the way she'd hugged him tightly after he told her he was proud of her. None of that felt fake. Whatever the DNA test said, the love they had shared was real. Wasn't it? The next morning, Gabriel met with Mia in a quiet cafe downtown. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the turmoil inside him. "I got the test results," he began. "Elena isn't my daughter." Mia's face paled, and for a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. "What? That can't be right," she stammered. "I was sure." "Sure?" Gabriel interrupted, his tone sharper than he intended. "Mia, you came to me after 17 years and told me she was mine. Did you even consider the possibility that she wasn't?" Tears welled up in Mia's eyes, and she shook her head. "I swear, Gabriel, I believed it. I wasn't with anyone else, except..." Her voice trailed off, and realization dawned on her face. "Except who?" Gabriel pressed, his heart pounding. Mia hesitated, then whispered a name. "Daniel. He was a friend. We only..." Gabriel raised a hand to stop her. He didn't need the details. What mattered now was that another man might be Elena's father. Mia explained that Daniel was someone she had known briefly, a struggling musician who had worked odd jobs to make ends meet. She hadn't thought of him in years and had no idea where he was now. But the mention of his name opened a door Gabriel hadn't considered. There was a chance that someone else was connected to Elena in a way he never could be. Determined to get answers, Gabriel hired a private investigator to track down Daniel. The process was slower than he'd hoped, but a few days later, the investigator called with a lead. Daniel was now an Uber driver, living in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Boston. Gabriel debated whether to approach Daniel himself or let Mia handle it. Ultimately, he decided to go. If this man was Elena's father, Gabriel needed to look him in the eye. When Gabriel finally met Daniel, he was struck by how ordinary the man seemed. Daniel was in his early 40s, with tired eyes and calloused hands that spoke of a life far removed from Gabriel's world of luxury. At first, Daniel was wary, unsure why a stranger in an expensive suit wanted to speak with him. But as Gabriel explained the situation, Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "I didn't know," Daniel said quietly. "I swear, I had no idea. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Daniel had lived his entire life unaware that he might have a daughter. And now, he was faced with the possibility of a connection he never expected, and a responsibility he wasn't sure he was ready for. Gabriel left the meeting feeling more conflicted than ever. He had come searching for the truth, but instead, he had found another man grappling with the same uncertainty and fear. The question now wasn't just about biology. It was about what kind of father Elena needed and who was truly prepared to step into that role. When Gabriel returned home from meeting Daniel, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The truth was out. Elena wasn't his daughter. Yet despite knowing this, he couldn't turn off the feelings he developed for her. Every memory they had built together over the past months was still vivid in his mind. How could something that felt so real be based on a lie? Elena was in the living room when Gabriel walked in, her legs tucked beneath her as she flipped through a book. She looked up and smiled, a smile that now felt like both a gift and a dagger to Gabriel's heart. She was innocent in all this, completely unaware of the storm brewing around her identity. "Hey, Dad," she said casually, the word Dad hitting Gabriel with an unexpected weight. For a second, he considered not telling her the truth, sparing her the pain of knowing. But deep down, he knew that wasn't fair. She deserved honesty, even if it hurt. "Elena," Gabriel began, sitting down across from her. His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed his nerves, fidgeting with the corner of a cushion. "There's something we need to talk about. It's important." The serious tone in his voice made her sit up straighter, concern flickering across her face. "What is it? Did something happen?" Gabriel hesitated, searching for the right words. I recently did a DNA test. It was to confirm something about our relationship, and well, the results came back today." He took a deep breath, his chest tightening. "Elena, the test showed that I'm not your biological father." The room went silent, the weight of his words settling heavily between them. Elena blinked, as if trying to process what she had just heard. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Gabriel reached for her hand, but she pulled back instinctively. "I didn't know," he said quickly. "Your mother, Mia, she believed I was your father. I believed it, too. I had no reason to doubt her until recently. This doesn't change how I feel about you, Elena. You're still my daughter in every way that matters." Elena stood up abruptly, pacing the room as tears welled in her eyes. "But it changes everything, doesn't it?" she said, her voice trembling. "You're not my dad. You're just some guy who thought he was—" "Don't say that," Gabriel pleaded, standing to face her. "I've been here for you, Elena. I've cared for you like a father, because that's what I believe I am, no matter what some test says." Elena stopped pacing and turned to him, her expression a mix of anger and confusion. "Then who is my dad?" Gabriel sighed, the question he'd been dreading finally surfacing. "I met someone. His name is Daniel. He might be your biological father." The name meant nothing to Elena, but the implications were clear. She felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling, the life she thought she knew unraveling in an instant. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Gabriel stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "What happens now is up to you. You're still my daughter, Elena. I'm here for you, no matter what. But I think you deserve the chance to meet Daniel, to learn about where you come from. He deserves that chance, too." Elena's tears spilled over, and she turned away, hugging herself as if trying to hold her world together. Gabriel's heart broke watching her, but he knew this pain was necessary. She needed the truth to move forward, even if it hurt now. The following days were tense and quiet in Gabriel's home. Elena withdrew, spending hours locked in her room, processing the revelation. Gabriel gave her space, though it killed him to see the light in her eyes dimmed. He hoped she would eventually see that his love for her hadn't changed, even if biology said otherwise. When Elena finally emerged, she sat down at the kitchen table where Gabriel was sipping coffee. Her face was pale but resolute. "I want to meet him," she said simply. Gabriel nodded, setting his mug down. "I'll arrange it." Reaching out to Daniel again was an emotional experience for Gabriel. Though they had only met once, the man's humility and quiet kindness had stuck with him. Daniel was reluctant at first, nervous about what meeting Elena might mean for both their lives. But when Gabriel explained how much it meant to her, Daniel agreed. The meeting was set for the following Saturday in a neutral, quiet park outside the city. Gabriel drove Elena there himself, her silence filling the car like a heavy fog. As they pulled up, they spotted Daniel sitting on a bench, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Are you ready?" Gabriel asked gently. Turning to Elena, she hesitated then nodded. "I think so." Gabriel watched as Elena walked toward Daniel, her steps tentative but steady. A part of him wanted to stay close, to protect her from whatever emotions might come. But he knew this was a moment she needed to face on her own. As Daniel stood to greet her, Gabriel felt a strange mix of emotions, lost hope, and something he couldn't quite name. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. Elena's life was about to change again, and Gabriel could only hope she would find the answers and the peace she was looking for. The air was crisp and cool as Elena stepped out of Gabriel's car, her heart pounding so loudly that she was sure he could hear it. They had arrived at the park where Daniel was waiting, and for the first time in her life, she felt unmoored. Until a few days ago, she had believed her identity was secure, that she was Elena, the daughter of Gabriel Rossi, a man of power and wealth who had welcomed her into his life with open arms. But now, with every step toward the man sitting on the bench, her reality seemed to shift beneath her feet. Gabriel gave her an encouraging nod from the car, but he didn't follow. "This is your moment," he had told her earlier. "I'll be right here if you need me." Elena hesitated, gripping the straps of her backpack tightly as she approached Daniel. He was a thin man in his early 40s, his dark hair streaked with gray. His posture was tense, and his hands fidgeted nervously as he spotted her. Despite his nervousness, there was something kind in his face, a gentleness in the way he looked at her that gave Elena the courage to keep walking. "Hi," Elena said softly when she was finally close enough. Daniel stood up quickly, almost knocking over the coffee cup he had balanced on the bench. "Hi," he replied, his voice quiet but warm. "You must be Elena." She nodded, unsure of what to say. The silence stretched between them until Daniel broke it with a nervous laugh. "I've been trying to think of what to say to you all morning," he admitted, "but nothing feels right. I guess I should start by saying, I'm sorry. I didn't know. If I had—" "It's not your fault," Elena interrupted, her voice firmer than she expected. She surprised herself with the realization that she wasn't angry at him. Confused? Yes. Hurt? Definitely. But this wasn't his doing. "I didn't know either." They sat down together on the bench, the conversation slow and tentative at first. Daniel explained how he had met Mia years ago when they were both struggling young adults. "I was working odd jobs back then," he said, his eyes distant as he recalled the past. "Driving deliveries, playing gigs at dive bars, just trying to make ends meet. Mia was, well, she was a light in the middle of all that chaos. We weren't together long, but I always remembered her." Elena listened carefully, piecing together the fragments of her mother's past that she had never known. She asked about Daniel's life now, and he told her about his work as an Uber driver, his small apartment, and the simple life he led. "It's not much," he admitted, "but it's honest. I've always tried to do the best I can with what I've got." There was no trace of bitterness or resentment in his voice, only humility. It struck Elena how different Daniel was from Gabriel. Where Gabriel exuded confidence and control, Daniel seemed quieter, more introspective. Yet, there was a warmth to him that made her feel oddly comfortable, as if she had known him far longer than the 30 minutes they had been sitting together. At one point, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crinkled photo. "This is the only picture I have of myself from back then," he said, handing it to her. The man in the photo was younger, but unmistakably Daniel, his eyes full of the same kindness. Elena stared at the photo, her throat tightening. "You look a little like me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel smiled softly. "Maybe a little." The conversation flowed more naturally as the minutes passed. They talked about music, books, and little things that made Elena feel less like she was talking to a stranger and more like she was reconnecting with a part of herself she hadn't known was missing. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Daniel hesitated before asking the question that had been on his mind all day. "Elena, I don't want to overstep, but what do you want from me? I mean, if you like to get to know me, I'd love that. But if you're not ready, I understand." Elena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on her. She glanced back at Gabriel, who was watching from a distance with a concerned but supportive expression. In that moment, she realized something important. No matter what the DNA test said, she still had a place in Gabriel's heart that wasn't going to change. "I think I'd like to get to know you," Elena said finally, her voice steady. "But I need time. This is a lot." Daniel nodded, his relief visible. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." As they stood up to leave, Daniel surprised her by reaching out hesitantly. "Can I give you a hug?" he asked. Elena nodded, and as his arms wrapped around her, she felt an unexpected wave of emotion. It wasn't the same as Gabriel's hugs. Those were strong and reassuring. This one felt different, like the beginning of something fragile but hopeful. When Elena returned to Gabriel's car, she slid into the seat and let out a long breath. Gabriel glanced at her, his eyes searching hers for an answer. "How do you feel?" he asked gently. "I don't know," she admitted, leaning her head back against the seat. "But I think I'm glad I met him." Gabriel smiled, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "That's a good start." And for the first time in weeks, Elena felt like maybe, just maybe, she was starting to find her footing again. The days following Elena's meeting with Daniel were filled with introspection and cautious steps toward forging a new relationship. Gabriel noticed a shift in her demeanor. Not necessarily a bad one, but a more thoughtful, contemplative version of the vibrant young woman he had grown to love as a daughter. She was navigating a world where her sense of identity had been shaken to its core, and Gabriel admired her strength in facing it head-on. Elena began texting Daniel sparingly at first, unsure of how to balance her new connection with him and her established life with Gabriel. Their exchanges were brief but meaningful. Daniel would share small anecdotes about his life or recommend a book he thought she might enjoy. Elena would respond with careful curiosity, slowly peeling back the layers of this man who was, by all accounts, her biological father. One evening, as Gabriel and Elena sat down for dinner, she hesitated before speaking. "Daniel invited me to come over this weekend," she said, her eyes fixed on her plate. Gabriel set down his fork, his attention fully on her. "How do you feel about that?" "I think I want to go," she admitted, glancing up at him. "But I don't want you to think I'm replacing you or something." Gabriel's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice. He reached across the table and placed a reassuring hand over hers. "Elena, nothing could replace what we have. You're my daughter, no matter what. If getting to know Daniel helps you understand more about yourself, I support that. I'll always support you." Her shoulders relaxed, and she gave him a small, grateful smile. The following Saturday, Gabriel dropped Elena off at Daniel's modest apartment complex. She stood at the entrance, her nerves threatening to overwhelm her, but she pushed him aside and pressed the buzzer. Daniel's voice crackled through the intercom, and moments later, the door swung open to reveal him standing there with a welcoming smile. "Hey, Elena," he said, his tone warm but careful, as if he didn't want to overstep. "Hi," she replied, stepping inside. Daniel's apartment was simple and tidy, a stark contrast to the sprawling luxury of Gabriel's home. The walls were adorned with a few framed photographs and posters of classic rock bands. A guitar leaned against the couch, and a small stack of books sat on the coffee table. "Make yourself at home," Daniel said, gesturing to the couch. They spent the afternoon talking, their conversation punctuated by moments of laughter and quiet reflection. Daniel shared stories about his childhood, his struggles to make ends meet, and the dreams he once had of becoming a musician. He played a few chords on his guitar, and Elena found herself tapping her foot along to the melody. At one point, Daniel pulled out an old photo album. "I thought you might like to see these," he said, handing it to her. Elena flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing the edges of faded photographs. There were pictures of Daniel as a young man, his smile wide and carefree, and others of him with friends and family. One photo, in particular, caught her eye, a picture of Daniel holding a baby. "That's me," Daniel said, his voice tinged with emotion. "My niece. I always wanted kids, but it just didn't happen. At least, not the way I thought it would." Elena looked at the photo for a long moment before closing the album. "I think you would have been a great dad," she said softly. Daniel's eyes glistened and he smiled. "Thanks, Elena. That means a lot." As the afternoon turned into evening, Daniel insisted on cooking dinner. It was a simple meal, spaghetti with homemade sauce, but Elena found herself enjoying the warmth of the moment. They sat at the small kitchen table, their conversation flowing more easily now. "I was nervous about today," Elena admitted as they ate. "Me too," Daniel confessed with a chuckle. "I didn't want to mess this up." "You didn't," she said, her voice steady. "I'm glad I came." By the time Gabriel arrived to pick her up, Elena felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in weeks. She hugged Daniel goodbye, a gesture that felt natural and unforced, and promised to visit again soon. In the car, Gabriel glanced at her, his curiosity evident. "How was it?" Elena smiled faintly. "It was good. Different, but good. He's a nice guy. I can see a little bit of myself in him." Gabriel nodded, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "I'm glad it went well." That night, as Elena lay in bed, she thought about the two men in her life. Gabriel, the man who had raised her with unwavering love and support, and Daniel, the man who had unknowingly given her life. They were so different, yet both had given her something invaluable. For the first time since the DNA test, Elena felt a glimmer of hope that she might not have to choose between them. Maybe, just maybe, there was room in her heart for both. As weeks turned into months, Elena's life became a careful balancing act between the two men she now called family. Gabriel and Daniel had yet to meet, a reality that hung over Elena like a storm cloud. Every time she visited Daniel, she returned to Gabriel's house with a mix of guilt and gratitude. She was grateful for Gabriel's unwavering support, but couldn't shake the fear that introducing the two men would create tension she wasn't ready to handle. One evening, Gabriel brought up the topic she had been avoiding. They were sitting in his study, the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating the room. "Elena," he began, his tone measured, "how's everything going with Daniel?" She hesitated, unsure how much to share. "It's good," she said cautiously. "We've been talking a lot. He's really nice." Gabriel nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's good. I'm glad you're building a relationship with him." But do you think it's time I meet him? Elena's stomach twisted. I don't know, she admitted. What if it's awkward? What if it doesn't go well? Gabriel leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. Elena, this isn't just about me or Daniel. It's about you. If meeting him helps you find some clarity or peace, then I'm willing to do it. I just want to be part of your journey, wherever it takes you. Tears pricked Elena's eyes at his words. Gabriel had always been her rock, and his willingness to step into unknown territory for her sake only deepened her love and respect for him. After a long pause, she nodded. Okay, let's do it. The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday at a quiet cafe in downtown Boston. Elena chose a location carefully, someplace neutral where neither Gabriel nor Daniel would feel out of their element. The hours leading up to the meeting were filled with nervous anticipation. Gabriel dressed in his usual polished manner, his tailored suit a stark contrast to Daniel's casual attire when they arrived. Elena felt the tension immediately as the two men shook hands. Gabriel's firm grip and measured gaze contrasted with Daniel's more relaxed, hesitant demeanor. They sat down at a corner table, the silence heavy as they waited for someone to break it. Thank you for meeting with me, Daniel said, his voice calm but tinged with nervousness. I know this situation is unconventional. Gabriel nodded, his expression neutral. It's a complicated situation, but what matters most is Elena. If this helps her, then I'm all for it. Elena watched them carefully, her heart pounding. She could sense the unspoken tension between them, the contrast in their lives, their roles in her world, and the undeniable fact that they were both trying to find their place in her life. The conversation started slowly, with Daniel sharing more about his life and how he had unknowingly become part of Elena's story. Gabriel listened intently, his sharp mind analyzing every word. Despite his calm exterior, Elena could tell he was struggling to reconcile this man with the DNA test results that had changed everything. As the meeting progressed, the tension began to ease. Gabriel asked thoughtful questions about Daniel's experiences, and Daniel reciprocated by expressing his gratitude for how Gabriel had raised Elena. I may be her biological father, Daniel said at one point, but you're the one who's been there for all these years. I'll always respect that. Gabriel's expression softened, and for the first time, Elena saw a hint of acceptance in his eyes. You and I may be very different, he said, but we both care about Elena. That's what matters. The meeting ended on a positive note, with both men agreeing to take things one step at a time. As they parted ways, Elena felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time since the DNA test, she felt hopeful that the two most important men in her life could coexist. Later that evening, Elena sat with Gabriel in their living room, the warmth of the fireplace casting a soft glow over them. How do you feel about today? She asked. Gabriel sipped his drink thoughtfully. It was unexpected, he admitted, but I'm glad I did it. Daniel seems like a good man, and if he's important to you, then he's important to me. Elena smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you, Gabriel, for everything. Gabriel reached over and squeezed her hand. You're my daughter, Elena. Nothing will ever change that. As she went to bed that night, Elena felt a newfound sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, she believed that it was possible to navigate this complex web of relationships without losing herself or the love of the two men who meant the most to her. As Gabriel, Daniel, and Elena began adjusting to their unconventional dynamic, an unforeseen complication arose. Gabriel, who had always prided himself on being meticulous and thorough in every aspect of his life, couldn't ignore a nagging doubt that lingered in the back of his mind. Despite his efforts to accept the DNA test results, something didn't sit right with him. The timing, the circumstances, it all felt too convenient. One evening, while Elena was out with friends, Gabriel sat alone in his study, staring at the manila envelope that had contained the fateful DNA results. His instincts as a businessman, honed over decades of deals, betrayals, and secrets, refused to let the matter rest. After a moment of hesitation, he picked up his phone and made a call to a private investigator he had worked with in the past. "Michael, I need your help," Gabriel said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "I want a second opinion on something." Discreetly. Within days, Michael returned with a detailed report. Gabriel's suspicions were confirmed. The lab that had processed the DNA test had ties to a third party, a name that Gabriel instantly recognized as someone from his past. A former business associate, Victor Klein, had harbored a deep resentment toward Gabriel for years after a failed deal that had left Victor bankrupt. Gabriel hadn't thought about Victor in years, but the connection between him and the lab was too coincidental to ignore. Fueled by a mix of anger and determination, Gabriel confronted Victor in his office downtown. The once powerful man was now a shadow of his former self, his demeanor nervous as Gabriel stepped into the room. "Gabriel," Victor stammered, forcing a smile. "What brings you here?" "You know exactly why I'm here," Gabriel said coldly, tossing the investigator's report onto the desk. "You manipulated the DNA test." "Why?" Victor's face paled, and he hesitated before answering. I needed to level the playing field. You've taken everything from me, my business, my reputation. I wanted you to feel what it's like to lose something important." Gabriel's jaw tightened, his anger barely contained. "You didn't just try to hurt me. You manipulated my family, my daughter. Do you have any idea what you've done to her?" Victor's eyes darted to the floor. "I didn't think it would go this far. I just wanted to shake things up, make you question yourself." Gabriel leaned in, his voice low and menacing. "You've crossed a line, Victor, and you're going to fix it. Now." Armed with the truth, Gabriel faced the agonizing decision of how to share it with Elena. She had spent months building a relationship with Daniel, believing him to be her biological father. Gabriel knew this revelation would shatter her, but he couldn't allow her to live a lie. That evening, as they sat in the living room, Gabriel took a deep breath. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you," he began, his tone heavy with emotion. She looked at him, concern etched on her face. "What is it?" Gabriel hesitated, searching for the right words. "I've been doing some digging into the DNA test results. Something didn't feel right, and I couldn't ignore it." Elena's brow furrowed. "What are you saying?" "The results were tampered with," Gabriel said gently. "Victor Klein, a man I had dealings with years ago, manipulated the test to make it seem like Daniel is your biological father. But he's not." Elena stared at him, her face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "You're saying Daniel isn't my father?" Gabriel nodded, his heart breaking at the pain in her voice. "I'm so sorry, Elena. I know how much this has affected you, and I hate that this happened, but I needed you to know the truth." Tears welled in Elena's eyes as she tried to process the revelation. "Does Daniel know?" "Not yet," Gabriel admitted. "I wanted to tell you first. This is your journey, Elena, and you deserve to decide how to handle this." Elena sat in silence for a long moment before speaking. "I need time to think," she said quietly, her voice trembling. Gabriel nodded, respecting her need for space. "Take all the time you need. Just know that I'm here for you, no matter what." The following days were a whirlwind of emotions for Elena. She felt betrayed, angry, and heartbroken all at once. Her newfound bond with Daniel now felt like a fragile thread that could snap at any moment. She debated whether to tell him the truth, fearing how it would affect their relationship. When she finally met with Daniel, she couldn't hold back her emotions. "The DNA test was wrong," she blurted out, tears streaming down her face. "You're not my biological father, Daniel's face fell, and for a moment, he was silent. Then he reached for her hand, his grip steady. "Elena, I don't care what some test says. You've become a part of my life, and I'm not walking away from that." His words brought a measure of comfort to Elena's turmoil. Though the truth had shaken her world, she realized that family wasn't just about biology. It was about the connections they chose to nurture, the love they chose to give. The revelation about the DNA test had created an emotional storm that Elena wasn't sure she'd ever navigate. The betrayal by Victor Klein and the knowledge that Daniel wasn't her biological father had shattered the fragile equilibrium she had fought to maintain. But amidst the chaos, one thing became clear. She needed to redefine what family meant to her. Gabriel, ever the steady presence in her life, encouraged her to take things one step at a time. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, Elena," he told her one evening as they sat in the quiet of their home. "Life isn't about perfection. It's about progress. We'll figure this out together." Elena decided to meet with Daniel again, despite the turmoil the revelation had caused. As they sat across from each other in a small cafe, the tension between them was palpable. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for me these past few months. Even though the test was wrong, I don't regret getting to know you." Daniel looked at her with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "Elena, I meant what I said. You're still a part of my life. The DNA doesn't matter to me. What matters is the connection we've built." His words brought tears to Elena's eyes. For so long, she had defined her identity by the biological ties she thought she had discovered. But now, she realized that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the love and support people chose to give each other. "I want to keep you in my life," she said softly, "but we'll need to redefine what that looks like." Daniel nodded. "Whatever you need, I'm here for you." Back at home, Gabriel was waiting for her in the living room. His eyes searched hers as she walked through the door. "How did it go?" he asked gently. Elena smiled, though her emotions were still raw. "It was good. Hard, but good. I think we're going to be okay." Gabriel nodded, relief washing over his face. "You're stronger than you think, Elena. I'm proud of you." She sat down beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I couldn't have done this without you," she admitted. "Even when everything felt like it was falling apart, you were there." Gabriel wrapped an arm around her, his voice steady. "I always will be. You're my daughter, Elena. That's never going to change." In the weeks that followed, Elena found herself slowly piecing her life back together. She focused on her art, pouring her emotions into each brushstroke. Gabriel encouraged her to showcase her work at a local gallery, and for the first time, she felt confident enough to do so. The night of the gallery opening was a turning point for Elena. As she stood among her paintings, surrounded by friends and supporters, she felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. Gabriel stood nearby, his pride evident as he watched her interact with guests. "I told you your work was incredible," he said when she approached him later in the evening. Elena laughed, her eyes shining. "You always believe in me, even when I don't believe in myself." "That's what fathers do," Gabriel replied, his voice filled with warmth. Meanwhile, the situation with Victor Klein reached a resolution. Gabriel took legal action against him, ensuring that he faced consequences for his deceit. But true to his character, Gabriel also sought to understand Victor's motives, offering him a chance at redemption. Why give him a second chance after what he did? Elena asked one evening. Gabriel's expression was thoughtful, because holding on to anger doesn't help anyone. People make mistakes, Elena. Sometimes they need someone to show them a better way. His words resonated with her, and she found herself letting go of the bitterness she had harbored toward Victor. As the months passed, the bond between Elena and Gabriel grew even stronger. Daniel remained a part of her life as a trusted friend and mentor, proving that relationships could evolve in unexpected ways. One day, as they walked along the Boston waterfront, Elena turned to Gabriel. "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" Gabriel smiled, his gaze thoughtful. "Life rarely goes according to plan, Elena, but the twists and turns are what make it beautiful. I wouldn't trade our journey for anything." Elena nodded, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. The past year had been a whirlwind of discovery, pain, and healing, but it had also taught her the resilience of the human heart. "I wouldn't either," she said softly, slipping her hand into his. As they continued their walk, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city. It was a new beginning, not just for Elena and Gabriel, but for the family they had built together through love, trust, and unwavering support.